Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to YouTube Live. And today we're going to be talking about atheism to Islam with a French convert to Islam by the name of Theo. Now, I'm just waiting for him to come on the live stream. So before he actually joins us, just wanted to give salam to everyone. Let's see who's here. Muhammad Habib, John Watson, Mukeeth, Khan. Who else is here? Grey Wolf. Usual suspects. Raqib Hussain, Expert Diate. Pondering Soul. Excellent. Give us a few moments while Hood is coming. So, how do I choose mods here? Because Yusuf saying I need some mods. Do I make him into a mod? What do I do? There we go. Assalamu alaikum.
Sorry for the,
How you doing?
for the delay. Alhamdulillah, I'm fine. Alhamdulillah. And you?
That's all right. I'm good. I think there's a bit of an echo. Do you have YouTube open on any tab?
Let me see. Wait a minute. Yeah. Is it good now? Or maybe it's the room. Okay.
No. It's perfect. Perfect. So how are you doing? How's everything?
Alhamdulillah. I'm very good. I'm doing well. And you?
Good. Very well. Alhamdulillah. So just wanted to give the viewers a bit of a, because we went live already. Normally we just, go live together. But anyway, so before I go into, the story of Hud and how he came to Islam and all of those things, just wanted to mention it's extremely important as human beings that we are influenced by other human beings and their stories. And that's why what I'm planning on doing is doing a series of YouTube live streams with people who came to Islam and to use that as an opportunity to, inshallah, be a means by which other people can come to Islam. Because a lot of people, before they convert to Islam, they look at, convert stories. But also to learn and understand that fundamentally, it's not always about getting down to deep philosophical arguments. There is a spiritual, emotional journey with it as well. So just to get us sort of started, why don't you tell us your name and how you sort of started thinking about the important questions of life?
Okay, so you asked my name, right? Sorry, I didn't hear you well. Okay, my name is Theo. My given name, alhamdulillah, is Theo Lispri, which is pretty classical name in France, alhamdulillah. And after I became Muslim, I took the name Hud, alhamdulillah. So nowadays people call me Hud, alhamdulillah, which is the name of Prophet in Islam, alhamdulillah ta'ala. And how I start to think about the importance of life. Actually, I think I really start thinking about that when I entered in high school, in senior school. And I was an atheist, like Subur mentioned. And my family was close to new atheist movement in his ideas, basically. So my father, alhamdulillah, my mother, and most all my family basically believe in objectivity, believe in truthfulness, believe in consistency. and value it a lot. And I was raised like that, and I used to value it a lot. And I used to think that religion is for weak-minded people. I'm from quite an educated family, alhamdulillah. And that's what I was taught since I'm a kid. But when I entered high school, I started to think more about it by myself, actually. And I actually became a nihilist at that point.
Wow.
SubhanAllah, that's interesting. I remember being, SubhanAllah, at the bus stop, waiting for the bus to come. And I was just thinking, like, I thought to myself, what make good things good, what makes right, what makes evil, evil, etc.
Yeah.
And I remember I ended up to the conclusion that actually nothing could objectively lead you to the conclusion that, for example, raping is wrong. And what's more interesting at the time is when I thought that, I remember saying to myself, I should not say that to my family because they won't accept it. In a sense, I was a closet nihilist. But even though I was a nihilist, and it's maybe weird to say, but I was not actually bothered a lot by these points. I actually accepted it quite easily. I accepted that there was nothing after death for me at the time, right? That there was no meaning, no value, etc., and life was just something meaningless. I really think I accepted it at the time. But the time when I really start to reconsider my atheism was when I read the Quran for the first time, alhamdulillah. And that was really the time when I start see it from another angle. And I'm always saying that I have actually two stories. I have a story about how I became Muslim, and I have a story about how faith entered my heart. Alhamdulillah, and I think faith entered my heart the first time I read the Quran. That was the time when I start having faith, alhamdulillah. And I didn't became a Muslim right away, but I waited a few years before becoming a Muslim. But after that point, that's when I start looking at the world from a different angle. In a sense, I changed my glasses and I took the theist glasses, and that's when I start really seeing things in my life. Because it's quite personally, I think atheism and Islam in general have a lot of rational and very good logical arguments.
Yes.
But I think what makes me very really convinced about the truthfulness of Islam actually and the existence of God actually is more personal science in my life. And you know, like when you're acting and doing things, and then you can feel sometimes God punishing you, right? I don't know if you get this feeling, but really after I read the Quran for the first time, of course I became curious about Islam, and I started to read more and more and more about it. Yeah. And the more I learned, the more I tried to implement it in my life. So, for example, even before being a Muslim, I used to fast sometimes.
Wow.
I was trying. I was like, it was Monday. I was like, okay, let's fast today. Let's try it. And every time I was doing good things like that, like fasting, like I don't know, praying, reading good stuff, etc. Every time I was doing that, good things was happening in my life. And every time I was doing haram, forbidden things, every time I was punished right away. It's like God was sending me signs. And I think that's how actually I became more and more convinced of the truthfulness of Islam, even though I thought a rational argument and logical argument for Islam and arguments for the God origin of Quran, etc. I thought it was very convincing and very good, but really it's when I felt actually the power of God in my life that I started becoming more and more convinced, alhamdulillah ta'ala.
Yeah. It's quite interesting that you mention, I mean, I want to trace back to a few steps here. So at the moment, you're about 20 years old, 21?
No, I was younger actually. I was 19 years old. Actually.
You're 19. So I want to dissect certain...
Right now?
Right now, you're I think 23, right? 23?
25 right now.
25. Yeah. So I want to dissect a few things, right? So obviously France is a very secular place, right?
Yeah.
And the French people are very proud. And being from a traditional French family, the last thing you're going to think about is religion. The last thing you're going to think about is God and these things. And of course, the last thing you're going to think about is converting to Islam, because a French person becoming Muslim is almost a miracle. You know,
Yeah,
there's very few French converts. So I want to trace back to a certain point, which is when you're 19, 18, the age that you were,
yeah,
young men like yourself, the last thing they're thinking about is nihilism, meaning of life, God, purpose, value, meaning. They're thinking about girls, drugs, partying, raves, these types of things. So, what made you think about these bigger questions rather than just do what everybody does as a young French lad?
actually, I think since I was a kid, maybe it's important to understand that, to understand and to appreciate my story actually. But since I was a kid, um, I had these kind of qualities or characteristic. I loved to think, and I always loved to see big actually. SubhanAllah, when I was 5 years old, I think, like when you're kids, I don't know if it's the case in UK, but in France, when you're kids, adults usually ask you what you want to do after that, when you become adults. I remember I was asked this question by my mom when I was 5 years old, and she asked me, "What do you want to do when we become an adult?" And I just answered, "I want to mark history. I want to become basically a legend. I want to be remembered." So since I was a kid, a small kid, I always have this ambitious like feeling
Yeah,
inside myself. And subhanallah, and I actually really tried to do so. And so before Islam, since I was a kid, I wanted to become remembered with art. So when I was a kid, I learned how to draw, and I was very serious about it. So I struggled a lot to become good, talented. Then I start music, and I start dancing. I was a break dancer before. Uh, I start writing also, and I think actually this I think helped me later on with Islam, because when you try to become good at something, you learn good qualities like self-criticism, perfectionism,
yeah,
patience, right? You also learn how to see flaws in yourself and weaknesses. And so I was always thinking, I had this kind of thinking,
yeah,
trying to look at my flaws, what I can improve. And I always accepted that I could be wrong, actually. I always accepted it. It wasn't like natural, because I saw in so many fields, in so many domains, that
yeah,
I had many flaws, weaknesses, and I needed to improve and to become better. So it was the same for everything. I knew it was possible I was wrong. And I mean, I was convinced of atheism. I truly thought I was an atheist at the time, but I never excluded the possibility of being wrong. And
mm,
also, it was important because the first time I read the Quran, Alhamdulillah, I didn't read the Quran with this idea that it was rubbish at the first time. The first time I read, I understood actually that it was possible, that it's from God, even though I never read it before. It was possible, and also I quite respected it actually. And it can be weird to say, but since like since I was a kid, I my goal in life was to become remembered, to influence, mark history, right? And even though I was not believing in Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam or Isa alayhi salam, for me these people were successful people,
yeah,
right? They accomplished my goal in life. They accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. So even though I was not believing in their message, I was still respectful of what they accomplished in the world. And
yeah.
the first time I had Quran on my bed, I remember I read it in my bed. And I remember, subhanAllah, I was looking at the cover, and I thought to myself, this book changed the world. I knew it. Like, it's not something.
Oh, as a non-Muslim, you knew that.
Yeah, I thought that to myself, and I thought, if it's true, then I need to follow it, and if it's wrong, I won't follow it. But
Yeah,
I got this neutral stance. I think it's lacking to a lot of people. A lot of people will come to the Quran with, I
negative.
mean, beliefs. with a presupposition and will try to impose their beliefs into the Quran, which is a wrong approach in my opinion. Allah. So yeah, and yeah, basically another thing is I said my family used to value a lot consistency, and of course, as atheists, I don't think they are consistent actually, but that's another issue. But my father, since I was a kid, tried to teach me critical thinking, thinking, and he always tell me you need to have your own opinion on things, right? And I knew I was not knowing a lot about Islam before reading the Quran. So I didn't have really an opinion before that. So I was, I mean, eager to understand, right? The first time I read the Quran. And yeah, that's basically, I don't know if it's a good answer, but that's how I think I start thinking to this question a lot.
I just wanted to highlight for the viewers something which, of course, they noticed, but I wanted to extrapolate it. When you approach the Quran, it was from the perspective of, I want guidance, and if this is true, I'll follow it, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't recognize that the attitude of the person has a huge impact on the way that the Quran will be valued by them. So if somebody turns up and they're like, religion's all nonsense, there's no God, this book's not going to convince me, and they're arrogant, essentially, they'll read the Quran and they'll be like, I knew it. It's just old fables. And if somebody is sincere, then they will look at the Quran and they'll say, okay, you know what? Let me see if this is from God. And they are asking for guidance. And then it'll be very clear to them that this is from God, you know? And I think that's what's missing. A lot of people don't recognize it's not just about giving out Qurans to non-Muslims, but it's also getting them to first understand that they need to be sincere. They need to ask for guidance. They need to have the right attitude. If they have a very condescending attitude, which I don't mean to be negative to French people, but French people, because of their history as well, they have a very negative attitude towards religion. I believe they were the first European country to essentially secularize their state as well. So it's very difficult to actually do that, but you did that, and Allah gave you guidance.
Actually, I want to add to what you said, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran actually, when he called to do da'wah, he's not just calling to do da'wah. In Surah Fussilat, when he say, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنَ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. He's not just saying call to Allah, but he say who's the best, who's better in speech than the one that call to Allah and do good deeds and say, I'm Muslim, I'm from among the Muslims.
Yep.
So this is very important. Some people maybe will have like very good arguments for Islam, but will lack example, won't be a good example, and won't have good character, and so on. And because of that, people will flee from religion and won't be attracted. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just give us a Quran and that's it, and we have like all the argument and all the ayah, but he also sends a messenger to be an example. And people learn and understand better with example than just like theory. People need to see practice, actually, see results. And I think it's one of the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sending a messenger and not just a book from the sky or something like that. Now, as for French culture, yeah, French culture is very lenient toward atheism. And there is a few reasons for that. And first one you mentioned. Historically, France was very anti-religion. Actually, traditionally, France is a Christian Catholic country. But even at the time, since Middle Age, the French king always had like weird relation toward church and toward the Pope. So it was always a conflictual relation between the king and the Pope. And after that, it became the first country in Europe to become secular. And the French secularism is also quite special, it's specific. Like it's quite different from the American, the USA model. I even think different from the UK model, because the way we see secularism in France is basically don't show your religion. A religion should stay private. You should not go outside and saying I'm a Muslim. You should not show any sign of religion. So if you go at school, don't go with a cross, don't go with a veil on anything that will show to people that you are a religious person, because if you do so, then it will divide people. Basically, that's the idea. And also, French people have a lot of issue towards authority. That's another thing. That's why you always have strikes and protests and things like that in France. We don't like authority. And when you want to enter Islam, you need to submit. You need to accept a form of authority upon you. And I think a lot of people have issue with that. And that's why in France, problem of evil, the problem of idleness of God, and this kind of argument are very strong on the French people lot too. Allah. And yeah, so Alhamdulillah.
That's quite interesting that you're saying as a nation they have the trait of rebellion, because Allah's created different nations with different traits, and going back to the French Revolution and getting rid of their monarchs and everything that they did, and also if you look at go across the pond and go across to like Malaysia, they're very submissive people. Like that's their culture. They're not like in France, being rebellious or being different is like valued. When in Malaysia, the more you're conforming, the more you are the less individualistic you are, the more cohesive you are, you're actually valued. So it's quite an interesting trait that French people are like that.
It's really a difference of value, I think. And I lived 2 years in Tokyo in the past. So I'm also very familiar with Japan culture, which is the opposite of French culture. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting contrast. And subhanAllah, if you look at history, actually one of the the most famous philosophers that came with the most weird ideas actually are from France, like Michel Foucault, for example. The one that came with postmodernism is from France, and many very, very subhanAllah, weird ideas against religion are actually from France, subhanAllah. All the whole existentialist movement and so on are actually from philosophy, right? Yeah, from Sartre, from Camus, and this kind of philosophy are actually all French.
Yeah. What's quite interesting about the French is that their rebellious nature, or their nature to have this type of trait of not giving up, of always fighting and having this type of attitude. I can recall a long time ago, I was watching a documentary about an Umayyad general with the name Abdurrahman Ghouti. Yeah. And he actually traveled from, originally he was from North Africa, wherever he was from, and he traveled all the way through to Spain, through to modern day France. And they were obviously spreading Islam and they were conquering territory. And there was a French leader with the name Charles the Hammer Martel, who you probably learnt about in your history book. And he, at the time that the Umayyads started attacking France, which a lot of people, by the way, don't know about, the French people were actually infighting. And Charles the Hammer Martel, he basically told everybody, listen, we may not like each other, but the Muslims are coming. So, and they managed to defeat the Umayyads, So there's, do you know about this historical account?
Yeah, I heard about it. Even though I think some people criticized it, saying it's weak. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's very famous actually in France. I think even non-Muslim people know that story. Yeah, that's very interesting. I think even one of the cause that led the first crusade, I think, was something similar, like the nations in Europe fighting each other. And then because of there was a big issue because of that. There was like mercenaries, trained mercenaries, doing fights amongst each other. And so the Pope came and said, "You should fight the Muslim. Don't fight here, fight there." They sent the crusade, and obviously they lost because Alhamdulillah. But yeah,
And you know what?
it is Da'wah in France very challenging actually, and very challenging. And I think we are late when it comes to Da'wah in France, and that's a big issue. And actually, one of my goal nowadays is to try to find a good approach to Da'wah in France, because Alhamdulillah we have a lot of material in English. And I think in UK and even in America and English-speaking countries, you are doing very well, Alhamdulillah. And Da'wah is moving forward. But a lot of people, when they want to do Da'wah in France, they will just maybe take what worked in UK and try to reproduce it in France, which is not working. The culture is too different. And one of my goals is actually to try to analyze and find a better way to do Da'wah in France, because it's quite bad. The situation is very bad in France.
Definitely, and also it reminds me of you see certain things, they affect certain cultures and they don't affect other cultures. So, for example, when I went to Germany and I saw the way the Germans actually are, you can't have the approach that you have in the UK. You have to have a totally different approach for the Germans. And the French, I mean, I've never given Dawa in France, but the French Muslims that I've met and the French non-Muslims I've met, I've got a pretty good idea. And also traveling to France, I've got a pretty good idea that we're dealing with a completely different paradigm here.
Definitely.
And somebody has to work out the key. Now, I had a little thought about this. I wanted to share it with you, that the French have this, not all of them, but the French do have this small segment of society that's very leftist. And they are intermarrying with second, third generation Algerians. They're also very proud of being, multicultural. There is a small, of course, there's that big chunk which isn't. So perhaps it's best to, rather than go out and dawah and there's lots of noise and the media starts attacking and it gets out of hand, you just focus on those types of people who may live in certain parts of France and who are more inclined towards that. And maybe an approach which is more to do with community and to do with these types of things. Because still, even though France is Christian, and correct me if I'm wrong, France is atheistic and secular, they still have a affinity of some sort with Christianity.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I think this segment of the population you call like this leftist segment of the population sometimes is even less receptive to Islam, which can seem paradoxal. Wow. But like in France, we have our vision of migration is quite different than in UK, and we have quite an assimilationist. I don't know if I'm assimilationist stance towards migration. So we consider that when people are coming in France, they need to leave their culture behind. Basically, you need to drop your culture and adopt the French culture. And even these people that are actually quite open when it comes to difference of ethnies and race and origin, they will expect from you that you will leave a few part of your culture behind, right? So yeah, it may sometimes work, but I'm not even sure they are more receptive. Actually, sometimes like some very rightist segment of the population will be more receptive to Islam because they already have these kind of religious values from Christianity because they are more conservative. So there is like remnants of these kinds of values, and maybe sometimes even these people will be more receptive. Some of the brothers I know that are the most practicing and the most serious about religion are actually these kind of brothers, like people that are from a very righteous family. As for what we should change in France, I think actually we should do what you start doing this last month. Actually, you should start to focus more on nihilism. I think that's maybe the best way to approach France, because I think French people, they can be very biased, right? A lot of times, subhanAllah, they won't listen to Russian argument, or they will just try because of their pride. They will just try to win the debates. And I think actually when you start pointing to nihilism or this kind of issues, this kind of question starts clicking on the mind, right? They start really like reconsidering things. They start to look at life in a different way, and maybe it's the solution. And maybe that's why most of the great existentialist philosophers maybe were from France, because maybe they were the most bothered by these problems. SubhanAllah. Maybe that's the reason why. But I think it's very effective actually to take distance. But of course, there is many things we can do, inshallah, and that's a long discussion. Alhamdulillah ta'ala.
And you really, I mean, this is what I like about the way that you're thinking. I mean, you attended obviously the IERA Dawa training course. When was it? 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2 years ago. Yeah.
And we had the whole European guys. So we had people from Holland and this place. And in many aspects, you were kind of in a less privileged position because they came from countries where the Dawa was quite established. There was something already they were doing, and they just came. When you came from France, I think you were the only person from France that came.
Yes.
And you're basically there to be a trailblazer. You have to create the path, inshallah, yeah? And this is, I like the way you're thinking, because you have to look at things from a macro perspective. Now, I wanted to throw out an idea, and then we're going to start taking questions like his brother asked a question to you and a few others, but I just wanted to just touch upon this point. You see, when World War II took place and the Nazis occupied France, and obviously for the French people, this was very traumatic, right? This was very, because they were never conquered historically. And I was watching a documentary about how it psychologically affected the French mentality. Because for people, it was just surreal that, you know, Hitler is walking around in Paris near the Eiffel Tower, and the Nazis are here and there, and all this types of thing. And today, the narrative of what's the name of that woman, Marie Le Pen or whatever her name is.
Marine Le Pen,
and her father, right? I don't know if he's still alive. He's a pretty old guy. It's basically that the Muslims are here to conquer us, right? They're here to conquer us. And that brings the bells of the Nazis again, right? And then French people get super defensive. And then the other issue, obviously added to that, is that French culture is very liberal, very secular, but the Muslims within France, they still keep a very strong identity of being Muslim, right? So then, when you're dealing with this dynamite, because it is literally, you know, a fault line. If you do the wrong thing, it's just gonna explode. You really have to think in a very intelligent way of narratives, because when you start going to France and you start talking to people about Islam, they'll just see it as part of the package of the takeover of France, right? You have to think of very different ways in a particular narrative that just makes French people totally, you know, just makes them lower their guard, because at the moment they're just like that. You know, anything you bring, they're just like, you know, they have this very strong barrier up.
Yeah, I think sadly the way du'ats in France try to tackle this issue is actually by abandon. How can I say? They stopped doing da'wah to non-Muslim, and that's an issue also in France. Most of the ads actually start to focus more on Muslim population.
Yeah.
And it's maybe because of that, because people actually are very closed toward Islam because of the context right now, and also because I think of the assimilationists vibe in France. So Muslims are scared about their kids, and they're focusing more on the education of the kids and the Muslim population. Now, how can we tackle this issue? Actually, this is not simple, because the reason why most people have also this aggressive stance toward Islam is because of misinformation. And misinformation is everywhere in media. Everywhere in media and in France. And we don't have a strong opposition, a strong media, Muslim media, to correct these misinformations. And that's why actually I think one of the best solution for this situation in France would be actually more political. It would be to try to reunite Muslim in France, to make a media or make a platform that have weight in it, and try to propose a different narrative. First of all, correct all the misinformation about Islam, because it's like a big issue. And I think it would be like the best solution right now. And we are far from being able to do it, but we will try, inshallah. And on individual level, I mean, the best thing you can do is actually discuss with people, showing good behavior, because when someone is not trusting you, then you have to double your efforts to be good with him, to put him at ease. And that's the best solution you can do on individual level. And also to explain and to show to some people that actually what is spread in the media is actually false and is not accurate information. But I will say that's the best way to do it right now. But I do know it's not enough. And I think I'm quite pessimistic. Actually, I'm quite pessimistic. I think it will end up actually by dividing more and more the population. And people, especially Muslim, will become more sectarists, and they will trust less and less the media, and it will be on one side people trusting lots this narrative and becoming aggressive toward Muslim, and in the other side a strong, a big group of Muslim becoming actually the opposite, so aggressive and towards the other group, and maybe even like the dialogue will be severed because of that. I think that's the most probable scenario, but we'll try to do something else. Obviously, nobody wants it to happen, inshallah.
And I'm really glad you mentioned media, because there are obviously French reverts, and I've met French reverts myself. And one of the first things that a revert does, or before they convert to Islam, is they look online. So even if, I mean, a lot of people don't recognize this, but even if you're not on the streets in France, if you have a nice studio, right, and you're talking about Islam, and in the beginning you may just make simple YouTube videos, but at the end of the day, there was a time, perhaps 20 years ago, where we could legitimately complain we don't have a voice in the media. But today, social media platforms have dwarfed traditional media platforms. So if you go to BBC, Sky News, and I'm not sure what you have in France, whatever it is, and you compare them to YouTubers, they're actually completely insignificant, right? The bulk of it is these people. And I'm really considering that perhaps in France, if there are a group of French native converts who are articulate, who are educated, who know French history, who know how to speak about Islam in a way that doesn't make it look like it's Islam versus the Western world, Islam versus France. It's more like nihilism, right? I mean, I think you're absolutely right that there's a reason why the philosophers who are heavy on nihilism actually come from France, and it's definitely linked to the French culture. So there's lots of potentiality there. And I just want to go to questions. So
Yes.
everybody that's online, they're just going to be asking questions, and you could just fire away and answer them. So Tari Zian T, he asks, Brotherhood, how was your experience and what challenges did you face after reverting?
What do you mean by experience?
I'm guessing challenges this is referring to.
Yeah. So, as I said, I'm from a very atheistic family. So the first challenge I have to do after becoming a Muslim is basically change my whole vision of life. I had to question everything I was taught. Even though I'm not saying like Islam was different from everything, but um, I was not saying like Islam was the opposite, the contrary, but I had to question at least. So that was the first thing, because since my view changed and I understood I was in the wrong before,
Yeah.
as I had to question everything basically. Like, okay, I was wrong about God. Why I'm not wrong about other things as well, right? So that's the first thing I started to do. And I think it's important to do for every Muslim, and not just revert actually. Even non-revert Muslim should, like born Muslim, should have this stance toward Islam. They should at some point try to question themselves and re-evaluate their values, beliefs, etc. So that's the first thing I have done, and it was not easy. But as I said, since in the past I was doing arts, I learned many things like music, drawing, etc. I was already used to see my flaws, my weaknesses, and to correct myself. So it was maybe easier for me than other person because of that. It was easier for me to accept that I could be in the wrong. And the challenge, I had challenges with my family.
Yep.
It was a case, and it was an interesting. Actually, my father was in an interesting position because, as I said, my father value consistency, and at least he tried to be consistent. And for my father, tolerance is a good value, is something important. And it was very difficult for him to accept me as a Muslim and to stay tolerant. But I could see, Alhamdulillah, and Alhamdulillah, I'm thankful for that he tried his best actually to stay tolerant. But you could see sometimes he was frustrated because for he, like, I took a path that was actually for weak-minded people. He did not understand how someone like me, coming from an educated atheist family, I could fall in these kind of things. And even nowadays, he struggled to accept that actually my how can I say, my trip toward theism, toward Islam, is actually a rational and logical thinking, and not something emotional, etc. For like the atheists in France have this very how do you say, fidist view? Yeah, fidist view of faith, basically, like of religion. They think you can only believe in religion through faith alone, and you should discard rationality.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting with my father. It was interesting because I could see he wanted to stay tolerant, and he was scared to approach this issue with me. But at the same time, sometimes he was just dropping a few, a few arguments, etc. But what I've done, I did not debate with my father. I did not debate with my father because I understood that my relation with my father was very emotional.
Yeah.
It was very, very emotional, and that's an advice to all people. Sometimes you debate will work on some certain person, but it won't work with other person, and especially between a father and a child. It's very, very difficult to debate, and I understood that right away, and I did not want to debate with my father. So what I have done, I just I just wait actually. When he was trying to discuss about Islam, I was listening. I was not answering to what he was saying, and then I was practicing, and I keep steadfast on religion. And only after that, subhanallah, after a few months, he start accepting it. And alhamdulillah, nowadays our relation is very good. Alhamdulillah, he's still atheist, still not understanding, but at least he's respecting my choice and understand that it's not just a moods. It's not just like fashion. I didn't become Muslim because of some I don't know, like it was not a rushed decision, right?
Yeah.
I really wanted, like it was thoughts, and I became Muslim by choice, and that I will probably, inshallah, stay Muslim. So yeah, no, we are respectful, and it's good, alhamdulillah ta'ala.
And you know, this type of advice is very important to people who come to Islam. When you first come to Islam, you're like a rocket, yeah. You just
Yeah,
have this iman boost, and you're just like that. But that can be quite detrimental because your passion can overcome your rationality and your wisdom of speaking to people and having respect and this type of thing. And for long-term dawah, it could be very bad. For short-term, making you feel good, telling everybody about Islam and being very direct with your family could be, you know,
you know,
could
maybe because of YouTube. I don't know why actually, but I think the way people are doing dawah nowadays is very, very different from the prophetic model.
yeah.
And it's interesting when people want to learn how to do dawah, most of the time they will go on YouTube and try to see the ads, but they will forget to look at Sirah. And I think one of the the best example to learn how to do dawah is actually to look at how the Prophet ﷺ has done.
Yeah.
And Prophet ﷺ has not started to like he was not starting to have rational argument with everybody.
Yes.
Not with everybody. Sometimes he used different arguments. Some companion, alhamdulillah, reverts it through listening Quran. Other
Yeah.
companion through looking at the Prophet ﷺ. And sometimes the Prophet ﷺ starts with showing evidence of the existence of God. Sometimes he was just pointing to the absurdity of having idols, which is also important, especially in France, maybe because we have this complex of inferiority. A lot of Muslims, when they start to debate or they start doing da'wah, they start trying to prove Islam or trying to prove that God exists or something like that. And they never reversing the situation. They never start pointing to the person they're doing da'wah with, that actually they are living a pointless and absurd life. They're not breaking idols, that they're trying to go to the Shahada directly, to the Tawheed directly. But both are important. You need to break idols, and you need to prove Islam is true also.
That's a beautiful point, and it also reminds me of, you know, I mean, if there's somebody who recently had somebody in their family that passed away, and you go up to them and you're speaking to them, and somehow within the conversation, the idea of God, religion comes up, they'll take it very seriously because somebody in their family passed away. Conversely, somebody the night before, they were clubbing, playing video games or whatever, they woke up in the morning, they're going to the supermarket, and then you happen to have a conversation and the same thing comes up about God and, you know, religion, they're not going to be very receptive because their state is very different. But like you said, nihilism, you really have to point people towards, you know, that, look, what is the meaning of life if, you know, if there is no God? If a million years from now, what's the point of all of the action that we're actually taking? Interesting enough, you mentioned nihilism and Pondering Soul, the brother, you must have seen my channel before. He's like, mashallah, when it comes to nihilism. So he's actually asked a question: have you successfully had someone we know take Shahada?
Actually, yeah.
Okay.
I haven't think a few, But this was definitely a long process. This was not something like I was just speaking with a person and then suddenly became a Muslim. Usually it was a long process. Actually, the way I became Muslim, that's a funny story. As I said before, like I had two stories. One was the story how faith entered my heart, and the second story how I became Muslim. And actually, as I said, I started implementing Islam in my life, and it was improving my life. And the more I was doing that, and the more I became convinced of Islam. And at some point, I was even like fasting. I was not praying, but at the end, I was so convinced about the truthfulness of Islam that I was sometimes like prostrating on the floor like 5 times a day. I was doing that just prostrating, and I was asking, oh, Allah, I was asking Allah, was saying, yeah, please God, let me live long enough for me to become a Muslim at the end.
MashaAllah. Allah Akbar.
It,
Allah Akbar.
it can seem weird because you can become a Muslim right away, right? But I don't know why. Maybe Shaitan led me to that, and I was delaying. And actually, the way I became Muslim, which is interesting. Once I had a showcase in a club. Like I said, I was a breakdancer, so I was invited to do a showcase in a club, and so I was done the show. And then I was invited to the square, the VIP square, and I just sat with friends. At the time, I was not drinking alcohol, alhamdulillah, so I just took a cup of water or something like that, right? And I was discussing with his friends. And I knew this friend was also believing in Islam and wanted to become Muslim, but was delaying, like me. And
Yeah.
I asked him why. Why are you not becoming a Muslim right away? And he just told me, he said, yeah, I'm doing too much sin. I'm sinning, and I'm not ready to become a Muslim because I'm doing too much sin.
Yeah.
And subhanAllah, I answered him in the way I should have been answered, subhanAllah. And I told him, yeah, but you know, shirk and kufr, so disbelieving is even more of a sin
Yeah.
toward God. So it's, even if you are doing smaller sin, you should at least try to become a Muslim. And you, at worst, you will be a Muslim that will be sinning, which is better than a non-Muslim sinning.
Yeah.
And I think I just say that to him, and for me, it was simple words. I didn't thought it would have an impact on him. But actually, the day after that, when I woke up, I checked my phone and I received a message from him. And he was just saying, let's revert now. Let's go to Tembas now,
Oh,
and let's. And I was like, no, you don't want to wait a little bit. He said, no, let's do it right now. And then subhanAllah, just at the time I had drunk belief, so I just say, let's wait on Friday, like that we can take shahada in front of and everybody.
in the
And
masjid.
I came to the mosque on the Friday, and that's when I took my shahada. So actually,
Wow.
the first person I took, first person that took a shahada with me actually was not I was not Muslim. Like the first time I successfully took someone to take shahada, I was not even Muslim, subhanAllah. But after that, had a few friends also, and through discussion, long discussion with them, they ended up becoming Muslim, alhamdulillah ta'ala. So it happened a few times, but yeah, it's not easy, definitely not easy, at least
Yeah.
in France.
Yeah. It's kind of funny that you said that it's better to be a Muslim who's sinful than be a disbeliever. And it seems so obvious, but some people, they haven't thought about it. And this
Yeah.
also reminds me of some people who, because obviously in my line of work and your line of work, we meet converts all the time. Some reverts, they actually say, when I finally became Muslim, it was because I was looking into Islam for a long time. And then somebody said to me, why don't you become Muslim now? And they're like, okay. Like they hadn't thought about it. They were like searching and researching. But somebody had to say, listen, like, you know, you should take Shahada now, basically. Yeah. And I've had this experience. I've dealt with people that they were giving themselves Dawa for years, right?
Yeah.
There was a sister who he'd been researching Islam for years. And she came to the Dawa table, and it was literally like, so do you believe this? Yes, I believe this. Do you believe this? Yes, I believe this. and she knew a lot about Islam. So I said, "Why do you become Muslim?" And they don't think like that. You have to sort of remind them. You can't just keep researching Islam. You have to actually take Shahada. But like you said, also something important. Who it doesn't happen in one conversation. It takes a very long time.
Yeah, well, actually, it's interesting because one of the things I changed a little bit when I imported Dawa in France, actually, is that the way I approach Dawa to people. And the thing is, like we learned in IRA to do the grow up method. So we start by asking, "Do you believe in God?" etc. Right? This is the standard method we learn at IRA.
Yeah.
But this method, I think we need to change a few things if you want to import it in France. And sometimes the first question I ask to people I'm doing Dawa with, especially in France, because people are so complicated in France. You have so many different beliefs and people are. And so secular, sometimes, like you said, they never thought about this question. Sometimes I just start my conversation asking, "Why are you not a Muslim?" Simply. Like if sometimes even atheists, I'm going to atheists and say, "Why don't you believe in Islam?" And most of the time they're shocked. Like you can see their face decompose, basically. They're like, and they are really thinking about it. That's like, it's almost like they're saying to you, "That's true. Why I'm not a Muslim? I don't know," right? And I like this question because, first of all, it will point to the real problem I think these people have. And I think when you ask the question, they will start asking the question. They will start asking to themselves the question. Sometimes they never asked before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the thing with proving Islam, sometimes you can have a very, very good argument for Islam, but some people will have these kind of idols in his heart and won't accept it because of that. But when the person don't have idols anymore, he have nothing to rely on, right? And I think in this kind of situation, people naturally go back to fitrah.
Yeah.
Naturally go back to fitrah. I think when they don't have idols anymore and they need something, they need something to rely on, and they don't have their idols anymore to help them. Naturally, they will go back to fitrah, I think. So this is a good approach. That's not the only approach, but I think it's a good approach in France.
I mean, I totally agree with that, because even the Shahada is La ilaha illallah. So the first thing you do is you smash all Taghut. And a Taghut doesn't have to be Lat or Uzra or Ganesh or Jesus being the Son of God. It could be that your lifestyle, your sins, your sense of national pride. It could be any barrier between you and Allah. And it could even be, I mean, I personally believe the biggest taghut of our times is consumerism, right? Buy. I think that's the biggest idol of our times. A lot of people don't recognize that, when Allah says, "Have you seen the one who's made his desire into his God?" Now, I know you're very interested in evolution, and we have some chats now and again.
Yeah.
To add, Yuval Noah Harari, who you know of, he's that Israeli historian of evolution. He says that in his book *Sapiens* and other places, he speaks about liberalism and stuff, and he says for the you could call it the capitalistic liberal order, right? He says they treat every problem like an economic problem. So if a person's not happy, they need to go and buy something. If a person's not happy, they need to get a better job. He says that that's the paradigm, So it is a taghut which needs to be.
Okay.
For you. I want to ask you one last question. I generally try to keep them as short as possible. I mean, like an hour.
Okay.
So someone's asking, Brotherhood, which Quranic verse melted you down? Which had an impact on you?
SubhanAllah. There is a few. First of all, I have an interesting anecdote regarding that. So basically, before reverting, I read the Quran one full time before reverting, and but Surah Al-Baqarah I read it a few times because every time I was like starting it, then I was stopping reading, then I was after a few months reading it back again, right? And subhanallah, I remember like every time I was reading Surah Al-Baqarah, I was reading, right, in French translation, of course. But every time I was arriving to Ayatul Kursi, subhanallah, every time I was shocked. Like I was simply reading, and I was ending up reading Ayatul Kursi, and every time I was reading this ayah, I was like shocked, really like surprised, like I was reading it for the first time again. So this ayah, subhanallah, I was quite impressed by this ayah. But it was not like ayah I was remembering in everyday life and it was following me. Like it's just interesting anecdotes regarding that. But I think the two ayah that actually had a strong impact on me is first of all the ayah in Surah Fusilat. Fusilat, I think. Yeah, Fusilat, yeah. سنريكم آياتنا في الأنفاق وفي أنفسكم حتى يتبين لكم أنه الحق. We will show you our signs in horizon and in yourself until it become obvious this is the truth. And as I said, what convinced me more of Islam was the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was acting with me on my life. And because of that, this is how I used to interpret the signs in myself, like sign that was personal sign, maybe it would not work on other people, but it was working on me. And the second ayah that also led me to that conclusion and helped me a lot is the ayah in Surah Baqarah. وعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم وعسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم. And it's possible that you will hate something, but it is good for you. Yeah. And it's possible that you love something, but it's bad for you. Is bad for you. والله يعلم وأنتم لا تعلمون. And Allah knows, and you don't know. And this also, like, it was linked to this kind of things. Like, I was really living this ayah. Like, really, sometimes a thing that seemed good for me, I was doing it, and it was bad. And understood, like, the wisdom, the hikmah of Allah afterward. And the opposite also was true. So these two ayah, in particular, actually was very strong on me, alhamdulillah. And actually, when I reverted, one of the things that helped me a lot, alhamdulillah, is for me when I was discussing and when I was approaching non-Muslim after my reversion, I really felt like it was not like I thought Islam was true, but I knew it. It's like I received a revelation. Like it was not possible to make me doubt, because I remember one of the issue I had at the time was, okay, I know Islam is true because Allah showed me clearly it's true. But now I need to prove it. I need to show it to other people how to do it, right? Because really, this is what impacted me the most. Like this kind of sign I received from Allah subhanahu wa taala. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, I mean it's beautiful what you said, because a lot of converts, they'll say the same thing, that like the verse in the Quran, Allah says, whoever believes in Allah, Allah will guide his heart, right? So it's direct guidance, and with certainty it's the truth, right? But then how do you articulate it? And that's where we need to obviously remind people not only of the logical, but like you said, we need to break down their idols, but also ask them to be sincere and ask for guidance. Because without sincerity, without humbleness, without asking and wanting guidance, all the logical arguments are,
and even when you start reading the Quran, subhanallah, and that was one of the things that shocked me the first time I read the Quran, is Fatiha, subhanallah. When you read Al-Fatiha, let's say even you are a critic of Islam, you end up reading a dua for guidance. Because in Fatiha, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, right? So you end up, if you read Al-Fatiha, if you start reading the Quran right at the beginning, you're asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide you.
Yeah.
And then Surah Al-Baqarah starts, alhamdulillah. And even in Surah Al-Baqarah, because Allah says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Right? It's a guidance for muttaqin, people that fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which means if you don't have this fear in yourself, this won't serve you in any sense. You need to take it seriously, basically, and to understand like the consequences of disbelieving, or at least having this fear, like this possibility of Allah existing and punishing you if you don't follow the order, if you don't have that, it will be very difficult for you to be guided through the Quran, subhanAllah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Jazakallah khair for giving us your time today. I definitely enjoyed this session. I'm not sure if you can see all the live comments, but we've had a huge number of comments. On your screen, there's a tab. If you click live comments, you would have seen them. You probably might not have clicked on the tab.
Okay, I don't see where. In chat, maybe?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, live comments. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they're distracting if you're talking, so it's good you didn't see them. There's a last question here by Jundullah, but that's actually a question I'm planning on doing a different session with. So we can answer that session, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for joining us on this YouTube live stream. I definitely want to have you again after a couple of weeks. And is there any last message you would like to give to anybody who's considering becoming a Muslim, or they're a Muslim and they're finding it hard to practice their deen? What's the sort of advice you would give them?
Okay, my best advice is short. Be sincere to yourself. If you truly believe in your heart, it's true, and you're not following it, you're not lying to people, you're lying to yourself. You're lying to yourself. So be very sincere to yourself. That's my best advice, inshallah. That's short, beautiful. But I think it's enough, inshallah.
MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for coming on the live stream. May Allah bless you and your all your efforts and all the great stuff you're doing. I'll definitely connect you with one of our guys I think you might have met him, Steve. He's another one of the French IRA guys. Definitely. Even in the comments, there was somebody from France who was saying that they want to connect with you. So what I'm going to do in the description is I'm going to put the link to your Facebook or whatever your contact detail is, so anyone wants to contact you.
And kids to my Instagram and my Twitter. Instagram and Twitter.
If you WhatsApp me, I'll put that in the description for anybody that wants to get into contact with you.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair for your time.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Barakallahu feek.